And Liz is here.
Liz is in.
And Kathleen is missing. Yep.
You're all set.
Thank you. Okay, it is 7 o'clock. We do have a quorum. I go ahead and I'm going to call to order this regular Board of Education meeting for Monday, January 25th. Start with a Pledge of Allegiance. Can we all take ourselves off mute and join with me? I pledge allegiance
to the flag
Flag,
of the
United
United States of America
America,
and
and
to
to
the
the
republic
republic
for
for
which
which
it stands,
stands
one
one
nation,
nation,
Under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty
and justice.
and justice for all.
for all.
Thank you. Reports, I'll go first. First of all, thank you all again very much for a very productive, very long day on Saturday. You were all very well prepared, a lot of good questions, a lot of good dialogue. Also, thank you to the whole administrative team. Fantastic presentations, and the amount of preparation that went into them was clear and obvious. The question and answers document that came out of the questions from before that meeting and during that meeting, as well as questions from tonight, will be compiled onto that document that will be shared on the board's website later this week. And then will be updated again in a couple of weeks after our next board meeting with the questions that have come up since then. Also this Saturday, we have our public hearing. The public hearing is at 10 o'clock. We do want to let the public know that we need them, anyone who wants to make public comment, they will have to put in their name, address, and email address by 9:30 that morning, so we can add them to the Zoom invite for the public hearing. And finally, there is a CABE Area 5 legislative virtual breakfast on the 1st of February. I'm attending. I believe Liz is as well, and we'll bring an update to the board after that. That's all I have for tonight. We do have a very long meeting. We do have some guests with us as well, so I'm being mindful of time, and I will turn it over to the superintendent.
Hello, everyone. And Jonathan, you again stole my thunder with a couple of things. So I'll just thanks. A couple of quick things. The good news is that the district is expected to receive additional funding from the CRF, the Corona Relief Fund. How much that's actually going to be, we don't know. It is based on Title I funding, so we should anticipate knowing about that hopefully in the next few weeks. We have the PSAT happening tomorrow at the high school for about 45 students. Hopefully the weather will stay away for a bit, but just in case, families should be aware that tomorrow we are expecting moderate weather throughout the day, but as the day goes on, and specifically if the temperatures don't rise, the afternoon is expecting to be a little bit more challenging. So families should just be aware of that in terms of making plans, especially for the littles. And then Wednesday morning, we're continuing to expect snow throughout the night and into Wednesday morning. So just make sure your information is updated in Power School if it isn't. We have our Saturday public hearing, so I don't think you need to know more about that. The last piece is in my communication on Friday to families when we announced the hybrid model. I indicated that there were a number of things or items that we consider as we make decisions around whether or not to bring our elementary children back in full. So I just wanted to be sure that I communicate to all families that it's not one of those things. They're just many things that we consider as we are in the decision-making process. And so I had received a bit of feedback, not a lot, a few emails from families wondering, well, what happens? Are we not going to come back in full if teachers, for example, don't get their vaccines? Because that was one of the items. No, that's not the case. There are a number of things that we consider. And certainly that's one thing that's on the horizon, but not at all the only reason that we would make a decision not to bring our children back. And I know our families are anxious, our kids are anxious, and our teachers are anxious as well. And so our goal is to get them back if we can do that safely. And I think that's it for me, Jonathan. I know we have a busy night and some guests here, so we'll move on.
All right, committee reports. I know we had a Budget and Finance Committee meeting or two. Ken, you want to catch us up from those?
Yes, absolutely. We hold on 1 second, a minute. All right, I'm not prepared. Where is that? Okay. Yeah, so we had a very productive meeting this past week, and we're going to be we talked a lot about the new building rental process, which does include our new I just ran out of my head anyway. And we talked about the new building rental process, as well as the new accounting process that we're going to be going through for athletics, and that's going to be later on our agenda this evening.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other committee meetings? I don't believe we have in the last couple of weeks. Liaison reports. Anyone raise your hands with any? Kathleen, please.
I have two.
Great.
As the PTA liaison on January 8th, we met. Basically, I'm there, and Dr. De Silva basically is the more interesting member than I am. And she reported about things upcoming, particularly about the new director of elementary education, as well as other, and how the budget is going forward, and answering many of their questions, often related to COVID. When it closed, they always asked me politely, and I was saying how much I supported the Directory of Elementary Education, and they asked some questions that I said I'd get back to Dr. De Silva on, particularly about the new organizational chart, which I talked to her about, so that they could see that everything's not new, but there's a reshifting, and I sent it to the PTA executive board so that they could let their committees know. I'm on a second, I'm also on the town's energy, or the PTA, I'm the PTA. I am the Board of Education's Energy Task Force representative, and that was on January 14th. And again, it's sort of a joint task force, including members from all the towns, but because the town and the schools have vehicles and buildings in conjunction, I'm there actually to listen and to take questions and ask them of other people if need be. But particularly, they were talking more about, our LED lighting. They're talking about getting more and more EV electrical vehicles in the town. They're talking about hopefully from the state getting off fossil fuels for 15 years, looking at heat pumps in schools, and also eventually, in our RFPs, asking for electrical buses as we look down the line. This is all looking down the line. There will be a meeting with the Board of Selectmen with members of this committee to talk about this as we view this. And as we were talking about this, I didn't encourage them, and I think they have, to send some of this information to Senator Haskell and Representative Berger Givallo, because they were talking about how can we, dovetail all of this. So it's actually very exciting work in terms of the whole town and including all of us. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other liaisons? Sean, great.
I was thrilled to join the Ridgefield Prevention Council's first meeting of the year this week. They are launching a new website. If it's not up already, it should be up soon. Looks awesome. And they do have an event on January 28th, a few days from now, at 7 o'clock via Zoom. Liz Jorgensen will be speaking on what are teens up to now, weed, dabbing, vaping, and more. So I encourage everybody to go to the Ridgefield Prevention Council Facebook and or webpage and sign up and watch.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, great. Moving along. The first discussion and possible action item up is, if you'll recall, about, Liz, was it early December, late November, when you had the legislative breakfast in which we were talking about COVID relief funds? You requested that it be brought to the board as an agenda item, and we did do that and discuss that. During that, this board discussed whether or not we should work either as Ridgefield or with other neighboring districts, advocating for additional COVID relief funds from the state. Board agreed to allow Liz and myself to work separately then and now. And we've done that. We've both kind of coalesced around the idea of Ridgefield acting on its own behalf and working with our legislators who have joined us tonight to hopefully come up with a suggested formula that we could bring to Hartford to help help them to provide the funds to different districts in a manner that we feel would be most appropriate. Is that fair, Liz?
Yep,
Right.
you've captured it well.
Do you want to bring us, since we're all here and we have Rep. Gravalo, who was not our rep at that time, and Will Haskell, who was not in your breakout session, if I'm correct. You want to bring us through that breakfast and kind of what brought us here, and then we can open it up to a general discussion with the board and with our representatives. Sure.
So Dr. Silva, keep me honest here, because Dr. Silva was here as well. So basically, as the legislative body goes through the reimbursements related to COVID, the methodology that has been used up till now is either Title I or the education cost sharing, which obviously doesn't take into account any kind of actual in-person costs versus remote, or any kind of size of district or other actual costs. It's just a blanket, and it's based on different demographics than are related to the COVID pandemic. And so as we were discussing that in the breakout session at the legislative breakfast, one of the recommendations from the legislator that was in our breakfast was to work on what other alternatives we could come up with to create a potentially more actuals relevant cost sharing model. The suggestion at that time was to, think about partnering regionally, which we, see in some of the proposed bills and things like that. But the reality is other school districts may have stayed fully remote, which means their cost profile is very different than a school district like Ridgefield, where we've done absolutely fantastic keeping our kids safe and in person since August. And so we want to make sure that the representatives that are on the phone tonight hear directly that the community of Ridgefield will be unduly disadvantaged, even though we were able to make it happen so that our kids have been in school, which we all understand and agree is the best place for them in terms of their educational outcomes and day-to-day social and emotional well-being. So we came, Jonathan and I talked through it a bit. It wouldn't make sense for us to try to regionalize this, as we had no procurement regionalization or anything else for any of the PPE we needed. Their processes were very different in terms of the in-person versus remote learning. They were in different positions from a technological perspective across the state. So to try to find a similar school district that's been in from August through now without significant health issues and mostly in person wouldn't be right for the students of Ridgefield or the taxpayers of Ridgefield. So what we'd like to talk about tonight is potentially an alternative there, where we suggest to the state that we start to think about actuals for reimbursement versus any kind of model. And so that's what Jonathan and I started to discuss.
Thank you. And I'd like to open this up to the rest of the board, as well as Mr. Haskell, Ms. Gravalo. This is this is a general discussion. There's not a motion on the table now, but this discussion may lead to a motion, whether that's to write a letter from the board, whether that's to no motion and just discussion with Mr. Haskell and Ms. Gravallo, or something else, a working group, what have you. So I'm open, and I just want to hear other voices from our board as well as from our representation.
Can I jump in?
Please do.
How about that? I've looked at kind of what the models that Liz has been talking about a little bit and what's happened in previous years and what just happened recently. I know Will will be able to speak to some of the numbers that have been allocated to us. I would actually like to present the idea of perhaps forming a working group with some members of your board and offering myself to be part of that, where we can look at not just what we have done that sets us apart, but also what I can bring to this is looking at other communities that have done what Ridgefield has done, which is to go and get our kids back into our schools in that hybrid mode, and see how, not just how we compare to the rest of the schools in our district, but see who I can bring and what kind of ideas they have. I do think that we're going to need to provide, certainly, you talk about possibly a letter as part of that, but what should the content of that letter be as we appeal for what our students and our community deserves? And I think I can certainly bring the other districts that are more like us and have done what we have done and find out that that's what I can bring to the group. I think if we have someone like Ms. Flogel or anyone else who feels that they have some more experience with that communication, be part of that with me as well. I mean, and it's obviously something that we can't say a working group where we're going to meet every couple of weeks. We got to do this now. So I'm ready to jump in and work with whoever is willing to do that. Will, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. First, thank you all for having us tonight. And Mr. Chair, I appreciated receiving the invitation. It's great to see you all, even if it's virtually. I think Amy and I would love to work on this alongside you. And I think, given the fact that Ridgefield has 3 representatives, Representative Gucker, Representative Berger-Javallo, and myself in the state Senate, it probably makes the most sense for Amy to serve as the lead if you do decide to move forward with that working group. But I just do want to underline what Amy said, which is the urgency of making proposals to the state and trying to influence the outcome of how the state education department will distribute those dollars. And I'm sure this group is broadly familiar with the package that passed out of Congress and was signed by the president just before the new year. But it included $82 billion for education. Now, a third of that is going to be higher education, and Connecticut generally only receives about 1% because we're about 1% of the population. Back of the envelope math. So either way, we're going to wind up probably in Connecticut with $492 million to spend on K through 12 schools, which is sizable. Ridgefield obviously didn't get a tremendous amount in the first round. I think that was called it's alphabet soup, but it's ESSERF. I think Ridgefield got around $94,000 in total. The state distributed in that disbursement roughly $111 million. This is a lot more, obviously. 492 means we can make a larger impact. And it's not in any way based on Amy and I's conversations with the State Department of Education. It's not clear that they're going to use the same formula. I think they're open to new models. For one thing, the federal legislation that passed says that these are reimbursements for expenses through December of 2023. So districts have a little bit more flexibility in how that money is spent. Also, the federal government in allocating this new round of money, emphasized that it should be for the purposes of helping students in terms of social and emotional well-being, evaluating students in terms of learning loss, providing for that remediation, so to speak. I'm not an educator, and we'll leave it to all of you as to what the needs are out there, but I imagine there will be tremendous needs even after the immediate concerns of COVID-19 and plexiglass and PPE are met. So that's sort of the federal guidance of this legislation, and that's, I think, the spirit with which the state is entering the conversation. But there have been no final determinations as of this afternoon in terms of how that money will be spent. And I hope that Ridgefield can play a really meaningful role in making suggestions. So I'll defer to my colleague, Representative Berger-Travallo, in serving as a lead on that working group if it's convened, but I'll certainly keep in touch, and we're eager to report back on any progress.
So that's very heartening. It sounds like, are you saying that the state is open to hearing other, or open to using a different formula, and ideally hearing from municipalities as to what that formula might look like?
I think I won't speak for Amy. Based on my conversations with the State Department of Ed, they're having conversations right now about how the money should be spent. It's entirely possible that they use the same formula, but given the fact that the federal money comes with the emphasis on returning to school and helping students even after the pandemic ends, it's possible that the funding might be a little bit different. And to the extent they're open to feedback, that's our job in terms of legislators. So we'll make sure that they're open to feedback.
Great. Kathleen, I see your hand.
Yeah, despite the hiccups, I mean, I think our school district has been a model. I just heard on Saturday how Dr. DeSantis was being interviewed because of the work he had done on technology. So I think it's a wonderful idea to get together and to brainstorm so that we can coalesce and work together to show what Ridgefield has done and maybe be leaders in this and help determine how the money is being being distributed amongst communities, and not just by formulaic, but maybe by action. So I really support this in many ways.
Thank you, Kathleen. Any other, Margaret?
I just wanted to thank you both for being on tonight. And Amy, thanks so much for volunteering to head a work group. I think that's a great idea. A couple questions I had. One is, it sounds like timing is of the essence at this point. Do we have a sense of what that timing is?
I would certainly say that I would give ourselves a hard deadline of a week from now, honestly. I think that the sooner we act on this and the sooner that our bright ideas get in there quickly, because it really is just a matter of influence at this point. It's a matter of getting attention and getting it up there. So I would, and I'm ready this week to jump right in. I will set aside time each day that we need to. I do really think it needs to be out of the week.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I asked the question, because I assumed it needed to be pretty quick. The other thing is, and as you mentioned, we need to put a lot of attention against this and a lot of influence. In the past, when we've had legislation that we wanted to get our voices heard about, we've had a two-prong approach, which is potentially some board action. But we've also done individual action or encouraged some of our constituents in town to write to the local legislators or even others in Hartford. So I wonder if you feel at this point that we should also be encouraging members of our community to be reaching out to Hartford. And also, if so, obviously I know they'll be reaching out to you guys, but what other committees should they be reaching out to? Is it the Education Committee, Appropriations? Which ones would be appropriate?
I'm happy to jump in there. The legislature actually will really have a limited role. Obviously, Amy and I hope to influence the conversation, but it's not as though there's a bill moving through the Education Committee or the Higher Education Committee on the disbursement of this funding. It's a decision ultimately at the discretion of the State Department of Education. So normally I would recommend reaching out to the commissioner. He's a little bit busy becoming our Secretary of Education nationally, but I would still recommend reaching out to his office and to the governor's office. I think that is probably the best direction for advocacy. And I do just want to jump in and temper expectations slightly. Obviously, there will be more funding than there was in the first round, but we're also hearing from our colleagues that there's tremendous need from across the state. So we want to play an active role in fighting for this funding, but I also want to make sure that, you're not counting on dollars that don't ultimately come through.
That's fair.
Jonathan, may I jump?
Yes.
Amy and Will, thank you both for being here. I have a slightly different question. When we received our ESSER monies, there were very specific guidelines in which it needed to be spent. And obviously, I'm very empathetic for all of my colleagues near and far in the state of Connecticut, because I realize the challenges of opening school and keeping schools open. That said, many schools didn't open, so therefore many monies couldn't have been spent. So I do wonder, are those monies, or is there potential for those monies, because many districts received a significant amount of money whereas we did not and kept our schools open. So is there discussions around perhaps reallocating those monies that either A, were not spent because they could not open schools, or just simply were not spent because they couldn't meet those guidelines?
It's a really interesting question. I haven't heard the word reallocation used necessarily, but I have heard that the State Department of Ed is being pretty rigorous in making sure that the money was spent appropriately and that they're still waiting, because I guess there were 2 rounds of you know how this works better than I do, but there were 2 rounds of ESS, ERF funds, and on the second round, they're still waiting for some districts to justify their expenses to the state and to provide documentation. So again, I don't know if they're at the point of reallocation, but they are trying to make sure that all that money was spent appropriately. And to the extent it wasn't spent, it should certainly be, moved back into the mix.
Thank you.
Are there any board members that are against the idea of a working group? Does anyone have more questions for Representative Gervallo or Senator Haskell while they're here on this topic?
The only other question I have, is there any standing audience with the State Department of Education that the legislators have at all in this space? I know there's no bills flowing through that directly relate to this, but is there any standing audience or regular updates or Q&A times on any of this that you guys are aware of? Or even with Lamont's office?
Well, there's the governor's daily briefing and his daily update that he sends around 4 o'clock to legislators. But in terms of actually having interaction, Amy and I usually rely on the legislative liaison within the State Department. Sorry, Amy, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I really what you said, I was going to say it's more of an on-demand response,
Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Could we get that legislative liaison to be a part of the working group?
Who would that be?
I don't know.
Her name is Laura. I think that she would probably, maybe one of her deputies might be willing to be involved. She's stretched across 169 towns, so I don't know if she'd be willing to be a part of it, but we could extend the invitation.
Yeah,
Who
her
else
coming
on
up with
the
new models,
representative-
that might help her.
And she will certainly be one of those people who I am going to be communicating with regularly as we move through this, for sure.
If we did go this way, Liz, I'm assuming that you would like to be part of this working group?
Yeah, I would love to be involved, but I would love to get some other members of the board, just because given the urgency here, I don't want to shortchange anyone on timing. And during the day, I'm pretty not available. So I just want to make sure that other members of the board are also there, because I don't want to.
I would think 3 members of the board would be an appropriate representation. Do I see any other volunteer hands? That's the one I was looking for. Okay. And then what about the one right in the square right underneath you in my screen?
Your screen's different than everybody else's screen.
I know. That's why nobody knows who I was talking about. Tina, Liz, and myself, would that be something that this board would be okay with as representatives in such a working group? In which case, should we make a motion to authorize Tina Malhotra, Liz Flogel, and myself to work on behalf of the Board of Education in a working group with Representative Berger Gervallo, as well as other legislators that might join such working group?
So moved.
There's a second for that motion.
Second.
All in favor of moving forward in this direction?
Aye.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much. Thank you both, Will, Amy, for joining us this evening. Feel free to stick around. I know some of you have conflicts later on this evening, but there's another interesting topic coming up next, and we can move right on to discussion and possible action item B, open choice program. And we have another guest, Nick Simmons, strategic partnership advisor to the governor.
Hi, Nick. So
Hey, folks. Evening.
Hi there. So I'll start off. It just luck that we have Will Haskell here today. Actually, it truly is just a little bit of luck and timing. So this past December, I think it was this past December or early December, Dr. Cardona, the Commissioner of Education, reached out to me and asked if Ridgefield would be interested in exploring the open choice program. For those of you who don't know, the open choice program, at least the way it was defined in the past, was primarily, the purpose was primarily to reduce ethnic, racial, and economic disadvantages, in particular in other school districts. And so at that point, Nick Simmons reached out from the governor's office, and we had a very preliminary meeting to discuss open choice and what the purpose of the program was and whether or not the Ridgefield Public Schools or the Board of Education would be interested in exploring it. And so I learned about some of what would be happening or what might be happening on the horizon and spoke to our chair and invited Nick here tonight. Ironically, Will was already invited here tonight for a completely different reason. And then on Thursday or Friday of this past week, I received the proposed bill from Dr. Dumais at a CES. And as we know, Senator Haskell, Senator Duff, and Senator Kushner had introduced the bill to legislation on open choice. So I will turn it over to the people that know best about the legislation, open choice, and whether or not we want to consider exploring this further will be up to the board. Nick?
Great. Thanks so much for having me tonight. Good to see everybody. I don't know if I call it a coincidence. Maybe Will and I pulled a fast one on you and decided to team up. But it's good to see everybody. And I think that was a great introduction, Susie. You know, one thing I would caveat is there was a bill that was submitted, as you mentioned, a session or two ago on open choice. And as of now, we don't have such a bill coming out. I think we're still exploring all the options. And I think there's a variety of ways open choice could look. But you know, one of the things that might make the most sense in terms of expansion would be expanding the option of open choice to a community like Danbury and a community like Norwalk, which both are going through a lot of congestion. The diversity of those communities certainly could be better, and the diversity of the community, the surrounding communities like Ridgefield, might be a good fit. So we're really just in the exploratory phase. But you know, I'm here tonight just to hear from you all, answer any questions you have, and also just sort of hear from you. Thoughts, appetite, interest in the open choice program. And with that, you know, happy to follow any format that you think's best.
Nick, maybe what you can do is start off. The board received a copy of the proposed bill on Friday, but maybe you can start off just by talking a little bit about what the program would actually look like or has looked like in other communities that are ours. Why don't we start there?
Perfect. So the program is right now open choice, is only available due to statute in Hartford, New Haven, and Bridgeport. So those are the three cities that participate. The big idea of the program, more or less, is to provide families just the choice, the opportunity to send students to a district nearby if they want to. So that is sort of from the student perspective. From the district like a Ridgefield that would be receiving the student, the opportunity is really just to increase diversity of the student population. You know, Connecticut has one of the most segregated school populations in the country. And we have a very localized or provincial structure, which is pretty unique actually when you compare us to the rest of the country, where, you know, students are born in a certain small square mile area, and that's kind of, you know, what they're stuck with. And so we think this opportunity is a good one for families. It's a good one for receiving districts. There is a financial incentive for the receiving district to participate. Depending on how many students a district should take on, there is a pretty generous grant that goes into the budget for the district. That would be in addition to the ECS formula that would change with this as the students received. The student would be reflected in the ECS formula. And then I think the last thing I would say is that the program is overseen and implemented by the RESCs, and they take care of all the logistics of transportation, there is a lottery program for families to participate, which the RESC runs. There's also some important pieces like integration and preparing students for a new community, some upfront kind of like training and orientation, and finally some teacher training. And so going into this session, there might be some tweaks to some of those basics, but to some of those kind of fine details, but the sort of the big picture idea would be the same.
Nick, as I understand it, in these other communities that they've engaged in open choice, they traditionally would bring in children from other communities in the kindergarten year.
Yeah. I think we think generally the earlier the better, just in case, right? So students, if there's any sort of catching up that needs to happen, the earlier the better, and just acclimating students to a community, or earlier on is generally better.
And so, Nick, maybe for the board's benefit, who currently is participating in open choice from Fairfield County? And is anyone else engaged in the conversations or exploring the conversations to the proposed bill communities?
Yeah, so in Fairfield County, Bridgeport has been a long time participating sort of sender district, and a variety of districts kind of that ring around Bridgeport. Westport, West End, Fairfield, a few others. That's in Fairfield County. Across the state, there's 42 districts that participate. There was a second part to your question.
I'm trying to remember it. I think
Was what other districts are discussing it now?
Oh yeah, right. So we're looking at a Norwalk expansion, which is right nearby Bridgeport. So we just kind of add on maybe a few others to the west, like I don't know, like a Darien or New Canaan, who might not be participating in the Bridgeport program.
Okay. Thanks, John.
Keeping us on our toes.
How long has the program been in existence?
I think it's over 50 years.
Sorry, go ahead.
50 years, I believe.
Yeah.
It was called something different, Jonathan, I think originally when it began, if I'm correct, Nick, or Will, you're probably the experts, but just based on what I read.
No, I think that's right.
You mentioned remuneration to receiving districts. How does that work? Is there a formula around that, and what kind of numbers is that?
This was the kind of the grant.
Yes.
Yeah. So the way the current structure works is there's more or less a scale of grant size per student, depending on how many students that district should take. So for instance, if it's on a percentage basis. So if a district takes 2%, 2% of the student population is open choice, I believe the grant number is 4,000 per student. And if it gets up to 4%, it's 8,000 per student. And that money goes into the general budget and can be used as the district sees fit. And that would be in addition to the ECS formula.
Just for clarity on that, is that a grant on top of the actual cost to serve that student? So if we spend on average $17,000 or $19,000 a student, but the grant covers 4, is it then 23, or is it something else?
Yes, it's on top. It's in addition. And it doesn't have to be tied to the student. These are free floating dollars.
Nick, can I jump in on two funding pieces that are relevant here? One is that, by the way, Representative Berger-Javala was interested in this conversation. Her power went out, so she sends her regrets. But two things. In terms of the ECS formulation, the receiving district and the host district both see a half of a 0.5 in terms of the student population. So in addition to the grant, both this sending district and the receiving district have that student represented in their ECS population. Nick mentioned that the state picks up the tab for transportation, but another really important piece of the equation, at least based on Westport's experience, is that to the extent there are special education costs associated with an individual student, an IEP or something of that nature, it's paid for by the sending district, not the receiving district. So it would be paid for should the program expand by Norwalk and Danbury. And to Liz's question, I've gotten a lot of emails after our bill hit the system about the cost per student. And many towns in my district, in Reading, for example, which is a town that's very eager to participate in the program, they've got a per pupil expenditure of over $20,000. But the way that towns like Westport use the program is just to fill empty seats when a particular year or particular school sees decline in enrollment. So that $18,000 or $17,000 per pupil number, that takes into account the building, the teacher's salary, the smartboard at the head of the classroom, the principal's salary, all of these overhead costs that are not really reflective of what it would cost to actually put a student into a chair that otherwise would have been empty. In most districts, I think, view this as not a moneymaker per se, but something that is mutually beneficial.
Wait, so just to clarify, what I just heard is the reimbursement doesn't include that base cost to serve. That's just a sunk cost for the district. And then we get the grants, special ed, and all those other things. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so the town of Ridgefield, the taxpayers of Ridgefield would cover all the students, regardless of if they were open choice or not, with the exception of any kind of extraneous cost or ECS cost. I just want to clarify that for the town that's listening as well, that it's not the 17 plus that was just stated, or 19, or whatever our cost to serve is. That baseline gets absorbed by the town of Ridgefield and the taxpayers that pay that, just to be clear.
That's the transportation and special education piece.
Except for transportation and special education or other ECS formula related items.
I think that that's accurate, Liz. I would only push back that the marginal cost of increasing a student in a seat that would otherwise be empty isn't really $17,000.
Well, if there's a seat that would otherwise be empty. So I think that that's up for debate.
Actually, if that one seat is a break point where we have to add a teacher, it could be way more.
So that brings another question.
That's why it's the district's discretion as to how many students to take should they decide to participate in the program, not only how many students to take in general, but how many to take each year. So I went through the Westport public school system. I know that Westport would take whatever level was appropriate given that year's enrollment.
But it's not something that if you take someone, you want that student to then not be there the next year, right? If you're making a commitment to a student in kindergarten, you'd want that student all the way through. So I'm not sure exactly how that would work.
I think that the point is, so, it's generally from the macro level. We have districts like Danbury and Norwalk that have, they're congested, they're overcrowded, right? But near, you can have a Danbury, or you could have a Westport or a Darien that has open seats, right? So this isn't a, exclusive Danbury to Ridgefield sort of program here. It's hey, Danbury, how many open seats do you think you have, next year in kindergarten? Oh, you've got 5, you've got 10, great. Would you be interested in taking some Danbury students? Then you would speak to Bethel, then we would, et cetera, and go down the list. Right, so it's a way where the districts need to sort of just get on the same page about where some of the holes are, and then, participate willingly, and to Senator Haskell's point, participate willingly and just only in a way that where it financially makes sense for you. For instance, I'll just, as an example, Hartford, I think partners with 30 different districts for their students, right? So it's really a regional sort of, although that's a bad word, I shouldn't say that.
Kathleen, I saw your hand, and then Sean after that.
Theoretically, it's a fabulous idea. Having spent many years in independent schools in Manhattan and also in Fairfield County, as well as public schools. And independent schools have been doing this for years, providing dollars to diversify their populations. But they've also hired people who are in charge of equity and inclusion and diversity, who help both constituencies feel comfortable and learn and work together so that it's successful, particularly for the incoming students. And I just wonder how that could be incorporated into our schools. And that's just a question, because you want it to be successful for both sides. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think, Kathleen, that should the board want to explore this further, I think we do have to identify what the strengths are from those districts that have been participating for however many years, and what some of the challenges might be as well before I think we could really decide if this is right. Because some of the things that you bring up are natural, right? It's just how do children assimilate in general when they're coming into a community that's not their own community, right? It could be children that are coming from the communities that we just described. But if you think about even our faculty who brings in their own children, right? They're finding their way in a community that's not theirs. And I think just an added layer to this is that there are going to be assimilation issues, you know, and how we navigate those and how we ensure that any child, should we go down that road and we accept them into our school community, that they're truly a part of our community. And we've done our work to ensure that that's beyond the dollars, right? Because that's over here. That's important, of course, especially community that has a very tight budget. But outside of that, what's really important is that we come back to the purpose. And if it fits us and our needs and the purpose of the program, then great. But if not, then perhaps not.
No, I understand that it has to, because you want it to be successful.
Right.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I think you bring up such a good point, and I'll be perfectly honest, in the school district where I was a student in Westport, I would say that the program had a really wonderful impact on a lot of students' lives, but it also had some shortcomings in terms of the full and meaningful integration of the open choice students within the larger student body. So I think that there are lessons to be learned there in terms of what sort of wraparound services and to Nick's point, preparing students for success. I also just do want to point out, though, that I think that this is a wonderful program for students who have a chance to go to a world-class school district like Ridgefield. I also think there's a benefit to this program for students from Ridgefield. I think that we all do better when we have a classroom with socioeconomic diversity, with racial diversity, with students who have with classmates who have a lived experience that is different than our own. So while I think it's a wonderful thing to do for students in Bridgeport, and I hope it will be a wonderful thing to do for students in Danbury and for Norwalk, I think it would also be a great thing for students to do in Ridgefield should this board decide to move forward.
Yeah, that you took the words out of my mouth, Senator. That I think that's exactly right, and that is the overarching goal of the program. I would say. I mean, there's this financial piece, and there's of course this opportunity piece. But it's really to achieve a more diverse student population across the state of Connecticut. You know, and I think if we were to poll sort of parents in Ridgefield or elsewhere, that I don't think that they want sort of the first time to be talking about certain issues that definitely require a diverse perspective. I don't think they want their students' first time to go through that experience be when they go to college. You know, it's not setting anybody up for success. And the incoming students who might be sitting in a school that's 95% of color, and so this is kind of just fundamentally comes from a belief that integration and diversity it would just be a benefit to all.
Sean, go ahead.
All right. So from a diversity perspective, agreed. From an open seats, there is room at the end. I'm not concerned about that. This obviously doesn't pay for itself. This will be a burden on taxpayers. We're clear about that. A couple of years ago, I spent a significant amount of time speaking with a 90-year-old lady from town who was a teacher. She was a Board of Ed member in a previous life. She was a Board of Selectmen person in Ridgefield. She laid out exactly this program. Her concerns were transportation. The extra half hour, 45 minutes on either end meant these kids were not participating in extracurriculars at the end of the day. They were not integrating in anything but the classroom, and in some cases couldn't afford to pay for play, for sports, things like that, and were left out. And that's a problem. They didn't integrate socially as much as they did educationally. But that 12-year commitment thing, they enter in kindergarten, we need to own them through kindergarten. In the scenario I was given was these kids caught up, they integrated into the schools, the funding dried up and they had to go, and they went back to their other school and they were a year ahead and it was a problem as well. So we need to be cognizant that if we take on this program, this is for the long haul, and we own these kids from the time they enter the school district until they graduate, if they so choose, which means we need to know what the impact is to the classes all the way along those with our, Malone and McBroom surveys, as inaccurate as they've been so far, because there are breakpoints where we will have to spend extra on teachers, and that is not funded.
Laura, I saw your hand next. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, I just wanted to share a little different perspective. When I taught in Westport for many years, I had an open school student in first grade. And it was, of course, different in the regard I'm speaking like completely just as a teacher, and it was a young teacher back then, but it was an amazing experience. And I followed the girl all the way through graduating high school. And I think the assimilation piece, because it starts in kindergarten or first grade, is almost a non-issue because those kids are so open and willing to accept anyone. And it's more that they're a new student. It's not that they're from a neighboring district. And they really don't even, I mean, when that comes up at that age, it's just accepted. So it's not a real issue. I think if they were to come in fifth grade or sixth grade, that would be really tricky. But when they come in, it's really positive. And I think it had incredibly positive sort of implications for the whole class. But that said, at that point, I wasn't aware of all of the monetary issues and all of those pieces. So, I just thought I would contribute that piece.
Thank you. Will?
I just wanted to pick up where, Nora, I think that's so wonderful to hear. And to pick up where Sean left off, I think he raises a really important point about the time traveled for logistics. And that's exactly the motivation behind our legislative change. Look at Region 9, for example. Easton participates because students can easily go from Bridgeport to Easton, but getting students in the morning and every afternoon from Bridgeport all the way to Reading is a huge inconvenience, not just to the folks who are responsible for transportation, but for the students and the families themselves. That's why we're so interested in expanding this program, even if it's on a limited basis, to Danbury and to Norwalk, so that students can participate without having to travel far and wide to get to this district. And I take your point, Sean, about extracurriculars. I think that when we look at the Westport program holistically, that might be one of the shortcomings that's addressed. I'm not sure how meaningful the participation in extracurriculars was. That's a huge part of what districts like Ridgefield and Westport have to offer. So to the extent, and Nick and I have been having conversations about this, to the extent that this program expansion can include greater flexibility in terms of transportation timing, I think that would be really important.
Yeah, we have the benefit of kind of learning what's worked and what's not worked with the other districts. And this bill isn't just simply, what we're discussing is not necessarily just an expansion, but an expansion and an improvement on kind of what already is there.
Wait, just for clarity, Nick, earlier in the conversation, you said there wasn't a bill, and then you just said there was, and I thought I saw one floating around. Is there a bill on the table for this or not? I'm just trying to make sure we're on the same page.
So I from the governor's office, I'm sort of representing, there's not a governor's bill on this right now. And so I don't want to.
Legislative bill on the House or the Senate floor that you're aware of?
Senator Haskell, can speak to the bill that's moving through the Education Committee.
Got it. Just wanted to clarify that what we said is consistent. Thank you.
So there's kind of two different things that need to happen. With the governor's support, hopefully we'll get funding included in the budget to make this possible, but there's also a statutory change that needs to happen so that districts outside of New Haven, Bridgeport, and Hartford are eligible for the program. So we are working sort of in harmony on two parallel tracks, and there is a bill in the Senate.
And that bill is purely just to expand open choice to include Danbury and Norwalk, is that correct?
That's correct. And I should say, we're really hopeful that it'll be a bipartisan initiative. I've received some wonderful feedback from superintendents inside my district and outside of my district, and Board of Ed members from both parties. So I do think that there's growing interest in Fairfield County.
Margaret?
I think some great points have been brought up tonight, and I would like to find out more. So I guess my question is around what is it that you're asking for us to actually come out of tonight with? Is this just an agreement or not as to whether we might want to explore this? You know, if indeed the program gets expanded, we're not looking to actually make a decision right now because there isn't necessarily a decision to make, right? This is just about whether we want to move forward with exploring, and that could potentially consist of doing some due diligence of looking at some of the other towns that have done things, as well as some other analysis.
This is on our agenda tonight to assess this board's appetite to research this further.
Just one piece that I actually missed asking you, Nick, and I think that the board would benefit from this. If this was to move forward, the start date, we're quite a bits away, right? We're thinking about this school year 22, 23 as a possibility. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. That would be the start date.
So Margaret, to your point, this is on the agenda to assess the board members' appetite for researching this further. I can only speak for myself. I think that there are a lot of open questions around funding, around potential downsides to what otherwise looks like very good benefits to students, both coming to a new district as well as the students in that district. I think there are a lot of open questions. I would be very open to discussing and researching it further. I also just want to point out a couple of words that all of us board members hear once or twice when we first become board members, and they don't really mean much frequently, but we are agents of the state acting locally. And this is one of those rare instances where I can see where those words come in. This is where it wouldn't just be about Ridgefield. It would be primarily about Ridgefield because we are acting locally, but we'd also be putting on our agents of the state hat if we wanted to research this any further.
Yeah, I think that's fair, but we're also elected by the town of Ridgefield. So I'd love to have the town folks and PTAs and other constituents involved with that investigation to make sure that this is something that the community feels like they do want. I mean, I know we've got a couple people here who stated they speak for parents, but I wouldn't want to do that. I think we'd need to get them involved and really make sure that we're willing to raise our mill rate and we're willing to do that. And I agree that the benefits are there for the students that come in, but we do need to balance that against what is a very lean budget, historically very old aged buildings. You know, I get it, there's overcrowding elsewhere, but we've got building and infrastructure issues ourselves that we need to consider as well.
Very good points. Kathleen?
I agree with you, Liz, wholeheartedly that it would be a benefit to those coming in, but I want to do the counter argument that I think it's also an amazing, if it were to work out, and I have the questions, having worked in schools that did bring in diverse populations, and it took a lot of work on both sides, that it adds as much to our, it would add as much to our population as to those children coming in. And as we look at the world our children are going into, it's going to be a diverse world that they're entering. And I think it's one thing that we could be another part of their education. And I know there's many questions, but I just think that it's not just one-sided. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Ken, and then Tina.
And I just want to echo everyone else here. I do think that there is a benefit to Richfield students, an obvious benefit for a student coming from an overcrowded district. But again, as has been mentioned, there is a cost associated with that. And I think that I want to explore this opportunity because there is such value to Ridgefield students. But again, as part of that exploration, you know, I think these are questions that we need to ask and get answers to, so that when we are ready to make a decision, we have the complete picture of the benefits of the actual tangible benefits to our students, as well as the costs, whether those are opportunity costs or actual hard dollar costs to the district. So I want to explore this option because I think it is a fabulous opportunity for all involved. But I think, to Liz's point, I think we need to make sure that when we present it to the community for our ultimate decision, I think.
Thank you.
Jonathan, can I speak? Okay, I kind of, Ken said a lot what I was saying. I kind of agree with what everybody said. I think we need diversity. I mean, hello, I'm not the common, I'm not the common, the majority of this town. So we do need diversity. I completely agree. I think it's beneficial for both who come in and for our students. I do echo what exactly Sean said, that when these kids come in, we need to own them. They have to go K-12 because we're investing in them. They're part of our community. So we have to build on that. So I do want to explore it. I think there are so many questions. We do have very tight budgets. We know how this works for us. In the end, all these budgets go to the town to award. So this is not a decision we can make as a group. It's a larger conversation. I think that's where we have to take. And I do agree, we need PTA partnerships. We need community conversations. So I think, yes, we explore this further, but we do it with the open mind, like we talk to more people, and then we can make the true decision, because either ways, it's an investment, both for the children, for our town, for our schools. So this it's fiduciary, it's emotional, and it's about diversity. So it's a big change in conversation. So let's explore this, but let's do it with a partnership with the community. I think that's the most important piece that I've taken. I think we all kind of agree for that, as so far what I've heard.
Well said, thank you. Rachel, I saw your hand next.
Good evening, everyone. So I definitely believe in diversity, and I believe in exploring this further, but I also have some more thoughts, and I want to just throw them out there. And Senator Haskell and Representative Berger-Gravalo, since you guys are on this evening, and Mr. Simmons, I want you to listen and please give me your thoughts, because I was an educator too, so that's where I'm coming from, and I'm thinking about the whole child here. So maybe I'm thinking about this a little differently. If we're speaking that the expansion of educational opportunities for kindergarten and first grade students in neighboring towns is to attend Ridgefield Public Schools, I wonder, is that saying that those students then are not receiving a free and appropriate public education? Because that's truly unacceptable, right? They should be receiving that. So I guess I'm defining expansion on educational opportunity where there is differentiation of learning in the classroom, support for intervention, innovation of teaching and learning, and community support for proposed budgets. With respect for our neighboring communities, I would want to know, how do they feel of a lottery that would place children in kindergarten and first grade in another school district? Consideration, I think, needs to be given to having little ones on the bus for a long time before they arrive at school. And whether or not that is developmentally appropriate is questionable. But every school district faces challenges, every school district, regardless of the zip code. And every child deserves a good education. I do think that bills need to be proposed that speak to the direct problems on how to rebuild and reform. I would like to see a vote of whether or not the Ridgefield taxpayer wants to partake in the program. I think we've talked about that there is some financial impact possibly, and we could absolutely explore this further, like I said. But I also think, and I'm gonna go out on a limb here, I think as neighbors, we can help. And if it's educational opportunities, then I would recommend the following proposal. And Senator Haskell, I'm not a senator by no means, and I don't write bills, but I'm just going to go for this here. So I would say that we can come up with an act that provides grants to districts that foster relationships with neighboring districts, rebuilding the educational opportunities for all students through professional development. And the statement of purpose could possibly be to expand educational opportunities for all Connecticut students by authorizing district-to-district professional growth plans, and in return, offered the district providing the professional development funds to cover their unanticipated costs for the school year, like COVID-related costs or special education. Let me give you an example, because I did think about this a little bit over the weekend. As an example, let's say a neighboring district needs help implementing technology to differentiate curriculum. Then a district, let's say Ridgefield, can apply for the grant and put together a voluntary team to meet with the neighboring district and provide professional learning growth. I think we also need to acknowledge that our country is going through a pandemic and there continues to be damaging effects on our economy. But I would be happy to sit with you and further brainstorm around how neighboring districts can help each other. But this was my starting point. I don't think there's any blanket answer or quick fixes in education, but I do think we can move in a direction that's fair for the child. We can offer diversity. It's fair for the taxpayer and the educational community. And that's a big conversation, but I would love to be a part of it.
If it's okay with you, Jonathan, I'd love to just respond briefly and say, Rachel, I think it's a wonderful idea, and I certainly stand ready to support any legislation that tries to improve all school districts. And I probably should have been more clear when I proposed the legislation. I certainly don't view the open choice program, wonderful as it may be, as a cure-all for Connecticut's educational inequalities or frankly economic and racial segregation. I think that it's a stitch on a Band-Aid of an open wound. It's going to make the difference. It's going to make a difference in the lives for maybe a few hundred students, and that would be wonderful, but it's not going to solve anything close to all of our problems. And I think that students are the best investment we can make. And as a legislator up in Hartford, and along with Nick in the governor's office, we'll continue and I know I speak for Representative Berger-Giorvallo as well on this, we're going to continue trying to make sure that schools across the state, but including and especially those districts that are under-resourced and overcrowded, receive the state funding that they deserve to provide that constitutionally mandated education. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Rachel. I think Senator Haskell said it perfectly. And the only thing that I would add is, I'm from, I taught and was a 7th grade math teacher and principal in Harlem, New York. And I'm from Connecticut, but it was funny adjusting back because in New York, any student in all 5 boroughs can actually choose, and family can choose to attend nearly any school, assuming there's not some like the magnet type schools that require a test to get in. But any public school, and then if there's too many applications, it goes to a lottery. And so coming to Connecticut and to a place where we're so finely chopped up into little regions and the family almost has no choice, there's potentially a charter, potentially a magnet in the area. And so I think that's all that this bill is doing, and all that the sort of the thought process is just to provide families just a few more options. So it's not to say, let's give up on these districts, or some of these districts are doomed and now let's just save a few kids to send them elsewhere, but it's really just to provide choice. So you talked about different teaching styles or certain things. I mean, potentially the parent works in Ridgefield, and it's just easier for him or her to have the student there nearby. Because instead of going back and forth, and so that's really kind of all it is. And I think all the things you talked about in terms of the transportation and et cetera, it's not the state is actually not forcing any party in any way to do anything, right? If we included Danbury, they still don't have to really participate. No family has to participate, and no receiving district has to. It's really just providing the opportunity for those who think this might be a good idea for their community or their child to have that option.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments on this topic? This is not we don't have a motion on the table or anything like that. I'm just trying to gauge from this group how many of us are interested in researching further the open choice program. It seems like there is a general consensus around doing more research on this, that we are open to doing that research. Am I reading the room correctly? Reading the room on the Zoom correctly? Okay. Looks like, I don't know if, Nick, if that's what you came to hear, members of the Ridgefield Board of Ed are interested in hearing more and learning more about the Open Choice program going forward.
Great.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you guys for all that you do.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Will.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Before I go, I just wanted to say that my line, Center Haskell lines, or Department of Education, always open for any further questions you have in your process. And we spoke earlier, we'd be happy to connect you with any district, any of the 40 districts that have been participating. If you wanted to hear more how it's going with them.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
Good night. Okay, moving on. Acceptance of ERMS gift. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education accept with gratitude and appreciation a gift of a prone stander that has an approximate value of $4,000 from an anonymous donor for a student attending East Ridge Middle School.
A second? Liz. Okay, can we hear about this?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. It's Anthony Show. I'm the Assistant Director of Special Ed. Good to see you again. This item is it's called a prone stander, which is a physical therapy device that brings the body into a standing position from a seated one with lateral and anterior supports. It promotes students control of the head, trunk, pelvis, knees, and feet, and frees their arms for instructional tasks. This item is being offered as a donation to one of our students with an IEP in district. Very generous donation from an anonymous donor of a fairly significant value, and additionally it's customized for the student's specifications. So with just some minor tweaks here and there over time from one of our physical therapists, this is something that will last the student for many years and be a great benefit to them instructionally and physically.
Sounds like a very generous gift. Comments?
I'd just like to make a comment. So in my real life, I do work in this space, and the prone standers are a huge health benefit to students with mobility challenges. And I'm just it's so lovely that someone would do this for someone else. It is a huge, huge health and well-being benefit for the student. It's just heartwarming.
Yes, it really helps students beyond just the physical, right? So it helps them build strength, but socially, it really allows them to interact with other students and adults in the building and gives them a more full school experience.
Sean?
So this gift is intended to help one student, or is it transmittable to multiple students?
Well, it's tailored to fit one student. It's probably unlikely that it could be reconfigured to fit a student in the future because of its very specific specifications and size. But it would be the property of the district, so we could choose to review those specifications in the future if another student happened to be close to fitting those specifications, and we could look at having some of the pads replaced and resized, get a new student once the student grows out of it in the future.
Any more comments or discussion about this, Margaret?
First of all, I just want to say, how generous, and thank you so much to the anonymous donor who was willing to do this. And it sounds like an amazing apparatus, for lack of a better word. My question is just philosophically, typically when we look at gifts and grants, if it's something like, it sounds like this is to fulfill something that's been put into an IEP. And I know that with gifts, typically we stay away from things that should have been funded in our general budget. Things like we wouldn't pay for textbooks for classrooms and some of those things. So philosophically, I just wanted to put that out there if someone wanted to comment on that.
Is this a piece of equipment that was specified in an IEP?
That's correct, yes.
The department has purchase every year equipment for students, including standards, including many, many pieces of equipment. So we're not reliant upon the gift to fulfill the IEP recommendations.
Thank you.
Margaret, does that answer your question? Other comments? Okay, the motion is on the table. All those in favor of accepting this this gift? Nice, unanimous. Thank you, and thank you to the anonymous donor. Very, very generous.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Tony, thanks, Tricia.
Activity accounts update. I believe that's Dawn.
Sure. With Chairman Schoberg's permission, I'll take this agenda item and walk the full board through some of the discussions we've been having at the committee level. As you may remember, there has been a lot of discussion around the various checking accounts that we have and what their processes are. The Budget Finance Committee and Operations Committee took into consideration all of the discussions that were occurring and chose to review 3 of these bank accounts: the school building rental account, student activity account, and the athletics account. As a little bit of a quick overview, in the past communications at the committee level, there 2 of these accounts have some discussion that I'd like to bring to the full board. Recommendations that the administration has for the committee, and the committee has agreed that to bring these recommendations to the full board as a discussion item. First, I want to go over that when in reviewing the various accounts that we have, we looked at our neighboring districts and all of the policies and procedures that they have, and that our policies and procedures for our checking accounts or our bank accounts were very similar to what they have, with the exception of the athletic fund. While some of the districts in our area didn't have pay to participate, it was really hard to determine exactly how their financial accounting process was for those particular athletic accounts that they had. That said, the athletic account, we have recommendations from the administration has recommendations to the committee to change the way the athletic account is being processed on a financial level. We recommend that the athletic fund no longer be an actual separate fund in itself, where it carries a fund balance, and be treated more like one of the cost centers that the district currently has, like whether it's a department or school, but a financial entity, all part of the general fund. In doing that, there's a few parts of the athletic fund that would change. First, there would be no fund balance. So at the end of this fiscal year, we would come up with some recommendations as to what to do with the final amount of money that's in there. We would lean on Athletic Director Dane Street, as well as the high school principal, Dr. Greenwood, in order to give some recommendations for that. There has been some discussion on that, but when we get to that point where we know what the fund balance is that hasn't been used by athletics, we'll bring that back to the full board for approval. You heard on Saturday that during the athletic budget review that the rental revenue will no longer be part of the athletic program, and that it will be part of the building rental program. That's just a shift in who's handling the customers, who's handling the processing of the applications. It doesn't change the fact that as the individuals choose to rent either a field or one of the school buildings for an event of some sort, that athletics normally would have handled, it won't be going through athletics, it will. It'll still be approved by the athletic director and the principal, just as if it was handled through athletics. It's just the mechanism of the financial part of that will be now through the school building rental program. Two of the other areas is pay to participate, and gate receipts will still be collected at this time. Currently they're collected and they're maintained in the student activity account. At the end of each of the, you may remember the conversation about how those funds are handled, and at the end of each season, the student activity account would cut a check back to the town for the funds that were received for pay to participate or any gate receipts that came in. They'll remain in the student activity account, and certain expenses that normally would have been paid to offset those accounts will now be processed against those accounts. That's something that the athletic director and the principal will work on, as to exactly which expenses per sport event or what the fees are collected for will be offset in that fashion. Other than that, the full athletic program will be funded by the general fund. In essence, the budget that is currently set up for the athletic fund does cover, for the most part, the full complement of all the expenses within the athletic fund. So on the surface, it's not going to look any different from that standpoint. It's not going to look any different from a budgeting standpoint. It's not going to really change that much unless we start changing what other fees are collected or offset. This change has nothing to do with the programming of the athletic fund or how the programming is run or the responsibilities of the athletic department. It has nothing to do with that. It's more back office and a way of making the athletic fund part of the general fund and more transparent in that respect. Did I cover everything? I think I did. Great. Any questions on the update of our proposed changes for the athletic fund?
I think you went through them very clearly. So this came to the Budget and Finance Committee first, and they recommended that these changes be brought to the full board. Members of the board that are not part of that Budget and Finance Committee, questions, comments, concerns about making these changes. A lot of this is around adding a level of transparency to functions that were functioning just fine, but were confusing, especially to those outside of the school district and the Board of Ed. Kathleen?
Over the years, I've been hearing questions and questions and questions about this and whether it was transparent or not. So I applaud this effort, because I really feel as people come in, it's going to be clear, concise, and to the point. So thank you.
Anyone else? Is there a motion on this, Dr. De Silva, or do we
No, there's not.
just,
It's just
now it's come to the full board and we're all aware of these
information.
changes being made?
Right. The changes are being made. Our goal is to have it up and running in its new format for July 1st for the next fiscal year. And we did make that one change within the athletic budget to remove the rental revenue that he normally would have offset his expenses on, to move that in. But in also doing that, we also removed the overtime expense for the custodians that he normally would have paid for covering the rental of that. So now all that now is being processed through the building rental and through the facilities area.
We'll get a little less revenue and have a little bit less cost.
Correct.
In terms of big picture, as you know, through one of Dawn's district goals this year was to look at all of the bank accounts and add clarity to them. So as you can see, one feeds into the other. So the facilities rental and the review of the building rental accounts naturally now make their way and have a through line into the athletics.
It was just a month ago when we looked again at those district goals. This was very clearly on your list. On it looks like you've made major headway in putting this all behind us, and I appreciate the efforts that you've put in.
Thank you. If there are any more questions on athletics, then I'll move on to one other update that we have for the activity funds.
Yes.
Great. The next fund that I'd like to update you on, and that has gone before the Budget, Finance, and Operations Committee, is the Student Activity Fund. While we haven't really, as a committee, dove into the Student Activity Fund very deeply, one of the areas that we have discussed is the closing of the savings account, also known as that dormant account that everybody had been talking about, that's been sitting out there for years and years and years, and moving that money into the Ridgefield High School Student Activity Checking Account. We consulted with the auditors. We also consulted with legal on the best way to not only transfer those funds, whether it's a good idea, not a good idea, but also the use of those funds. We did close the savings account. We did move the amount of money that was in the savings account into the Ridgefield High School Student Activity Checking Account. With the guidance of the auditors, we also determined the best way to do that was to create a individual general ledger account for just the historic student activity funds that were sitting in that savings account. We've done that. Then we worked with the legal team to determine what's the best use of those funds. Are we entitled to just take those funds and use them for what we would normally use? And it was determined that through legal, they said two things were important. One was we need to follow whatever state requirements are for activity funds and any policies that we currently have on our side for student activity funds. The compliance around the student activity counts that's governed by the state of Connecticut is state statute 10-237. And basically it doesn't give a lot of guidance on usage, but what it does say is that we're allowed to have student activity funds, but we must designate one individual to be the oversight or the treasurer, if you will, of the student activity fund in each of the locations. So we have a student activity account at each of our schools, and our current policy 3453 dictates that it's the principal of the school that is the determiner for the use of the student activity funds. So that said, we are able to use those funds, and we've had discussions with Dr. Greenwood as well as the committee, and he has a couple of ideas on best use for those funds so that we don't have big balances left in our funds, which is another area that was discussed as why is all this money still sitting in these accounts? Why aren't they being used? And our goal is to find a usage for these funds to best suit all students. And if Dr. Greenwood, if you want to let the committee kind of know where you are with a couple of suggestions on the money, I'll wrap it up after that.
I'm just, sorry, if I can just go back to something for a minute. In terms of, I know that we have not fully discussed student activity accounts in general, but the goals, one of the goals is to not have this happen again, where we have large balances circulating from year to year. So in Dawn's draft guidelines, that portion is something that we'll speak about deeper so that we're not in this position, or anyone else isn't in this position in years to come, where they're looking to find out where the monies came from and how to allocate those. Go ahead, Dr. Greenwood, I apologize.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. In communication with some students and staff and a subcommittee here, we've got a couple of projects that we think really would benefit our students. The two projects, one being a video production space, and the other being some open spaces we're calling learning connections rooms. And so I'll start with the learning connections room. So these are 4 spaces that currently exist in the building that had fixed computer lab furniture. So if you remember in the early 2000s, when we did construction on the building, we put in these state-of-the-art computer labs, which are less than state-of-the-art now. And so this fixed furniture made these spaces in each of the departments pretty unusable. So custodians have already gone through, removed the furniture, repaired the tile, waxed and repaired the walls, painted. So we have 4 spaces: history, English, world language, and math. They're basically the size of a double classroom now with the furniture's out of them. And so our goal is to turn these spaces over to our kids. And really, as the students are re-engaging back into the building next year, we think it's really important to find ways to marry two ideas that we see kids all over the building, because we have spaces that are very quiet, the LOC, the library, and we have spaces that are considered to be more noisy, like our student center. But what we lack are spaces throughout the building where students can simply go, talk quietly with their friends, do group projects, meet with teachers, still have the ability to have light snacks. And so we think having these spaces available to students before school, during school, after school will really help re-engage them, keep them in the departments, allow them some quiet spaces to communicate with each other. So in turn, we'd like to use some of the money to furnish these 4 spaces with furniture that I would say is flexible and fun, student driven, and some technology pieces also that kids could really use to collaborate. So we'd like to use some of the money to outfit the spaces. Spaces exist, that was our responsibility. They're cleaned, they're prepped, they're ready to go, but we'd like to outfit it now with some student friendly materials and have them ready to go for the beginning of, if not this school year, definitely by the beginning of next school year. So that's project 1. Project 2 is a video production space. And so what we're looking to do is build a soundproof and temperature controlled space that also would house some video editing and live streaming equipment. The goal here would be to purchase mobile cameras, light systems, microphones, and computer editing and streaming equipment, so that our students themselves, our CTE students who are interested in that, could really be in charge of this video project, and they could be using it to stream sporting events, recitals, dramas, award ceremonies, plays, graduations, clubs, activities, really start taking all of the wonderful things that we do and bring them into the online world, so that everybody can really engage. All of our students can be celebrated in all their activities that they're doing. Grandparents elsewhere can be watching this stuff, and that we can really do it, produce stuff. When you watch a sporting event now, for instance, if you watch it from Tiger Hollow, you're getting an eye in the sky view. What we really want to do is we want to have a production team. We want kids who really to engage and to be part of the production and editing of material. So they'll be learning a new skill and be bringing something back to the community, something that we can be really proud of. And so that's how we'd like to spend a chunk of the money too. Both those we think would be really student-centered ways to move us forward with those monies.
And in discussion with not only other districts, but also with the legal team as well, one of the areas that one way to best use that money, or to best get that money to promote Dr. Greenwood's recommendation on purchasing the furniture is not the problem. It's not an issue, but if there could be some look at possibly supplanting, if that video production area would be part of a capital item or something like that. We don't think it was. We've discussed that quite extensively. But what a few of our other districts who have had the same situation, where they've had additional student activity money left over, and they've had discussions about the best way to approach a bigger project, would be to bring it before the board and have the board vote for a donation of the student activity fund to be put into an account, and then have that project worked off of that account. We currently do have a donations account, so that if we were to come up with the expense of that project, we would bring it back for a motion from the board to make that a donation from the student activity, from this historical student activity money, into a donation account in order to pay for the expense of the video production project.
So the ultimate objective of student activity money is to be spent on students and not to supplant the general operating budget. So right now, neither of these projects do that. The first project that Dr. Greenwood described, which is the learning connection space and making spaces available for kids and for kids' independent work or collaborative work, is far more straightforward. The second project that Dr. Greenwood described is a little bit less straightforward in that there is going to be over time, naturally, some impact on operations, right? Because we had to continue heating or air conditioning a particular space. And because of that, the recommendation is to have that piece of the second project to be considered a donation. Again, it's not supplanting anything that we intended on doing. You haven't heard us describe this in any type of with any type of curriculum connection, but there is some natural operational impact that will impact budgets this year and for years to come. In addition to that, there may be potential in the future, who knows, that the high school says, let's expand this video production into being, let's just say, a club or some other student-centered activity. And if that's the case, having it being part of a donation allows us to do that without any question of it being supplanting the operating budget, if that makes sense. So it's a little bit not as clear as the project one, because project one is straightforward. Joe and the team is not going to have to do anything but clean tables, right? That's kind of just, the work that will happen. The second project could lean to things in the future, number one, and number two, facilities and operations will navigate whatever very minimal cost that may be in the future. And so the second project, once we can determine cost, would come back to the Board of Education in a way such as asking the Board of Ed to accept it as a donation for blank project.
Thank you for that clarification. Sounds like great projects. Any comments from board members? Sounds like fantastic uses of these funds.
I said in the budget meeting that the video idea is awesome. I think it's long overdue.
Thank you.
Great.
And
Ken.
I just want to add the same thing about the communal spaces. I think, especially coming off of this COVID year, whenever we're able to get back into the classroom on a full-time basis, I think these spaces are going to be very important for our students.
Thank you.
Kathleen?
And adding on that, I love the fact that, how planned obsolescence was with those fixed technology spaces as open-ended and forward-thinking these spaces can be, the better. And I really like that, and having children being part of that, because they're the most forward-thinking people we have in the schools, I think, in many ways. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, moving on. Oh.
Jonathan, I apologize. So in the next few weeks, once Dr. Greenwood operationalizes what actual costs will be, et cetera, we'll bring something to the board for have this
approval of a donation.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Financial report. Dawn, you're still up.
I am still up. Yes. All right, let's see if I can move this along as well here. Before you is the financial report ending December 31st. This puts us about our halfway point through this fiscal year. We have, as of December 31st, obligated or expended $94,625,186 of our $99.9 million appropriation. It's approximately 95% of the appropriation. In December, we did file for our first ECR reimbursement, but the numbers do not reflect any funds that we've received from the state for the ECR reimbursement at this time. At this time, certified and uncertified salaries were expected to be within budget, as well as any employee benefits. The medical benefits are expected to be within budget. Other post-employment benefits and fringe benefits are expected to be within budget. Everything is tracking on budget. FICA and Medicare taxes through December, that's 13 payrolls that we've had. We're expected to be within budget. Getting to a few areas that we're not expected to be in budget, but hang in there. Special education is tracking within budget at this time. Transportation, we are still within budget on transportation. An area that we are watching that is not within budget at this time is energy. Currently, we're receiving electric bills that are beyond what we anticipated when we set the budget. There is a delivery rate by Eversource that increased that we weren't expecting, and also our demand rate is up as well due to the fact that we're running the filtration systems quite a bit in order to keep the air as clean as possible in the school systems. Neither of those expenses were anticipated when we set the electric budget for this year, and we are currently trending over in that area. We'll keep an eye on it, and we'll keep updating you as we see that expense. Hopefully it will level out a little bit, but right now we are expecting that to be over by the end of the fiscal year. Another area that we haven't really discussed a lot of, but is starting to show that will be over budget in, and that I'll be bringing before this board to keep you updated on, is food service. We normally budget just a small amount for free and reduced lunch at the high school level, because the high school level is not on our national school lunch program, so we don't receive free and reduced reimbursement from the state for the high school. So we do always budget a little bit to cover the expense of students who attend the high school who happen to be on that program. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of students in the school, and a lot of students are not taking lunch. So therefore, the revenue coming in from the free and reduced, or the revenue coming in from the whole food service program is not covering the expenses of running the program. We have salary and benefits for the employees. We have foods that we're purchasing. We have overhead, and we're not seeing that the revenue from the state is covering that. Normally, we would have a lot more revenue coming in from individuals who are purchasing different meals or a la carte or whatnot. The federal government has us on a program right now where every student is entitled to one free meal a day in any of our national school lunch program schools, which is the elementary schools and the middle schools. High school is not on the program, and it does not partake in that. However, any student 18 years and under who chooses to pick up a lunch or a meal at our East Ridge Middle School, which we offer the pickup between 3 and 4 o'clock Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, that is counted regardless of what school they attend. Still, we're seeing that that's going to be causing a shortage in that area. On my projections for this particular month's review, I have singled out the school lunch program, and you can see where it was budgeted. It's towards the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th from the bottom. We budget about $22,000. We are currently have expenditures that are hitting that account at $69,500, which is putting us over. We anticipate on that particular fund being approximately $500,000 over budget at this time. That could change as more students do come into the schools and start taking a lunch, and that we would be reimbursed for that lunch. But right now, we are seeing that that's going to be a problem going forward. We are working weekly and monthly with the food service organization in order to try to limit as much as possible the expenditures. We have reduced staff, we've moved staff, we've used as much food within our that we've already purchased and aren't purchasing as much as we normally would. Obviously, we're not selling the food either, so there's a little bit of savings both on one side and the other. But we're watching that and forecasting out with them as well what their expenses, they anticipate their expenses to be. But I wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, that is one area that at first didn't raise itself as being an over budget problem, but now it's going to be an over budget problem because where we would normally be able to cover that with the full food service program, we're not going to be able to. So we're going to need to bring before this board probably any expense from the high school as opposed to just covering the free and reduced lunch from the high school. We feel that by the end of the fiscal year, any revenue brought in for those schools that are on the free and reduced lunch program, the middle schools and the elementary schools, we should be able to cover their expenses with the program. It's the high school that we're concerned about and the overage in that area. In addition to that, COVID real quickly, I'll get into that, the full COVID update when I get to the memo, which is after the financials. But if you look at the projections, you'll see that the ledger account, it currently has $815,877 in spent funds, and encumbrance is $68,747. A total amount of $884,625 has either been spent or encumbered for COVID unbudgeted expenses at this time. Please know that that particular account is just what would normally be processed through our accounts payable, does not take into consideration the salaries. But in order to show it on the financials in this fashion, this is the accounts payable expenditure. So it's what would be purchased or a service. With that said, is there any specific questions on any of the financial report?
Rachel, I saw you first.
Jonathan, I just have a clarifying question. Do we need a motion before we discuss now and have questions?
I think that is the appropriate way to handle this. Do we have a motion?
Yes. I move that the Board of Education accept the financial report ending December 31st, 2020.
Do we have a second? Kathleen? Discussion. Kathleen?
I just have a question, Don. I know every year we vote on not taking federal funds for the high school for the free and reduced lunch so that we can serve or sell other kinds of products. Am I correct? That's why? I'm just remembering in the past.
Yeah, no, actually that particular vote, Kathleen, has nothing to do with the free and reduced lunch program itself. The high school is not on the National School Lunch Program, and it's not a vote whether to have them on or off. Okay. What happens is because we are on the free and reduced lunch because we are on the National School Lunch Program, we are bound by the regulations of the state that all foods have to be whole foods, that we have to follow the regulations. So any food that is either sold at an event or held or given out at a PTA, or if you were to have like a pasta party or anything like that would occur, we would have to regulate that in order to maintain the National School Lunch Program guidelines. And the vote is to not have to follow National School Lunch Program guidelines outside of the normal school lunch time. So anything outside of a normal school day, anything during a normal school day has to follow the National School Lunch Program. The vote is to not have to follow that outside of school. And that's the only part of that vote. It has nothing to do with the high school being on or off the program.
Thank you. I was just wondering if that was part of it. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Good question. Other questions on the financials?
Just a comment, if I can. This is a great rundown, Dawn, for the conversation we had earlier about actual cost and implications. So I just want to note that we shouldn't forget that, because food service is going to be one of those areas that I think in school is going to be a little bit different than those schools that weren't in school. So
one of those things that nobody really would have seen coming.
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready to take a vote on the financial report? All those in favor of accepting the financial report ending December 31st, 2020? None, unanimous. Thank you. Now, Dawn, you want to take us through the COVID-19 update memo?
Happy
Or is that you,
to.
Dr.?
Yeah, I'm hoping that my memo clarifies some questions that you may have had and or other town members may have had or brought up. I have restructured it to better show not only the COVID expenses that may run through the accounts payable process, but also to bring in the salary accounts that we have that are specific to COVID. On the beginning of the report, at the front of the report, I still maintain the breakout between the various cost centers that COVID expenses have occurred, and also where those cost centers or where those expenses fall. In other words, facilities carries $453,647 of our unbudgeted COVID expense. The nurses also have spent $26,729 of our unbudgeted COVID expense. Special education, $13,000. Technology, $526,237, and curriculum, $92,299. So that's a total of $1,112.98 in unbudgeted COVID expenses that we have expended or have obligated to pay through our process. In addition to that, the health office paraeducators, the next section down on that report, is now the salary expenses that have occurred through January 12th payroll. So health office paraeducators, if you remember that we had hired specific paraeducators to help out in the health office for COVID concerns. Their salaries have been $9,915 through January 12th payroll. Building substitutes, $217,250. Custodial overtime, $17,346. And our COVID liaison stipend, $8,947. If we turn to the second page of my memo, you'll see that this is an overall summary of the unbudgeted expenses, the same accounts or the same lines that we have talked all along: supplies, PPE, partitions, HVAC systems, storage containers, outdoor tents, curriculum, technology. And then we've added to that list there the salary expense, the actual salary expense at this time. And then food service, the amount of food service that we're over on that particular budgeted line. So all in all, we have $1,413,100.53 in unbudgeted COVID expenses that we have incurred. Underneath that, I have the amount of draws that we have pulled down or will be pulling down from grants, $293,095. We've transferred $189,888 in against the COVID line. And we have other funding, and that other funding, if you remember a few meetings ago, we discussed that the insurance company had some reimbursements based on COVID expense that we received, and that money was offset for PPE. So other funding there is $125,640. So we have offset of our $1,608,625. So we have uncovered, unbudgeted $804,475 as of this report. And then below that are the two grants that we currently have applied for and received, and where we stand with those grants. The Elementary and Secondary School Education Relief Fund, also known as the ESSER grant, we received $94,454. We've submitted for reimbursement $53,434 of that particular grant. On the COVID relief fund, we received and have been approved for 242,720. And so far we have submitted for reimbursement, and actually it's a drawdown, so it's not necessarily a reimbursement, $239,661 for that grant. I think you're on mute, Jonathan.
Margaret, I saw your hand,
Oh,
and I was on
are
mute.
you taking questions now, or did you, or I know there's a third page. I didn't know if you wanted to go through the whole.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can, yep, let me continue on. In the back of the, one more page through, in addition to, we've always had where we thought we might have additional expenses that could occur with our COVID expenses. Food service, obviously, that added that 480,000 to that that line there. We still have additional PPE that we may need to purchase, some protective supplies that we may need to purchase, some training materials that haven't been purchased yet, and there's some anticipated technology that we may still need to purchase. So that particular anticipated but not realized yet is $605,700. Thank you, Margaret. I forgot about that ending.
Right. So should I ask my question?
Sure.
So it's getting late, so maybe I just want a clarification in terms of the relief grants, just so I know that I'm doing my math right. So when under like ESSER, we say applied for and received the 94,000, is that really like, is received really more like eligible for, and that the submitted for reimbursement is drawn against what we're eligible for? So we've submitted and been reimbursed for 53,000 out of the 94. So potentially, if we had eligible expenses, there's another 40,000 that we could submit, about 40,000 we could submit for.
That's correct. With both of these grants, they're slightly different, but with both of these grants, we applied for we had to apply for specific COVID expenses that we would incur or we had incurred. And as we incur them, then we can submit to the grant to draw that funds down and spend that. The ESSER grant, they literally gave us those funds, but we have to file a report based on our usage, and we have to use those funds. And as soon as we use those funds, we can realize those funds and offset the expenses with it. Until we file that with the state, the funds are there for us. We just can't necessarily move the expense to cover that. So our actual coverage at this point is the 53,000. We have up to the 94, basically the 94, with the exception of the 6,360 is for non-public schools. And right now, only one of the 9 non-public schools has submitted an expense. The other school has not yet. So that 63 is $6,360 is not ours to spend, but the non-publics know that they have that ability to spend that as well. On the COVID relief fund, we don't receive those funds from the state until we submit the expenditure. So we literally had to send in reports and our backup as to what those expenses were. And that we could only send in reimbursements up through December 31st. That grant ends December 31st. So only the expenses that we incurred, that we submitted, that we would have, can offset that particular grant at this time.
Okay, so for the ESSER, that 40,000 delta, is it likely that we will have expenses, eligible expenses that we will then be able to, so we're not going to be leaving 40,000 on the table necessarily?
Not at all on that one. And there's no timeline. Well, there's a timeline on that, but it's a much longer timeline. And we do have the rest of the expense that we will be submitting to them so that we can offset as well. But that's more, I want to say, probably February, March, when we'll have that expense completed. And then I'm not sure exactly when the other non-public school is going to submit to us their reimbursement for their COVID expense so that we can apply that to the grant as well. And then for the COVID relief fund, that's just a matter of finalizing the end of December's payrolls and getting that report up to them. As long as the expense occurred and we can justify that the expense occurred before December 31st, we can still use those funds.
Margaret, just to add on, that was actually what I was looking to bring up, or I was bringing up with Will and Amy earlier, was for those school districts that received COVID relief funds, they were far greater than ours. And then if you know that they have to be spent by December 31st on some of those items, and yet those schools never opened, where is it?
Yeah.
And for those of us that have been open, and really, yes, we've had to go into hybrid, and yes, we've closed for moments in time for some of our schools, but they've really been moments in time. And so it's disheartening to know how these funds were allocated, knowing that it ended December 31st. There have to be leftovers somewhere.
But that aside, there is where we see to be covered 804. We already have 40 of that 804 covered, basically. Just not finalized paperwork on.
Correct. But at this time, the full amounts that we have received as of this report, that's where we currently stand.
Okay. And then one more question. On the first page, if I take that 1112098 and add it to the 253, I don't come up to 1413 that I see on the second page, and that is because of food service on that second page, correct?
Correct.
Other questions?
Sorry, one other thing from that, if comparing the first page to the second page, the curriculum line, I was confused because on the first page it's 92,299, and on the second it's 89,749.
Because some of the curriculum, the curriculum on the front page is just what goes through the accounts payable.
Oh.
I guess that is a little misleading, but with the accounts, the curriculum, the 89,000, some of that is part of the grants. And the expense was a process through the grants as opposed through the, right.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Don, can I read that back to you to make sure I understand it?
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure I'm clear. I'm sorry, Jonathan. Did I interrupt you?
Go ahead.
So the curriculum that went through AP was 92,000, but some of that 92,000 was covered somewhere else, either in our regular budget or something. So only 89 of it is COVID related unbudgeted. Is that right?
Yes, some of that, yes. Well, all of it is COVID unbudgeted related. I just find my backup for the. So the full 92,299 is unbudgeted COVID, and that has been run through our accounts payable at this time. There was a small amount of the COVID expense that was applied to the ESSER grant. And the difference between those two was what was applied to the ESSER grant, as it all went through accounts payable, but it was applied to the ESSER grant. So I guess I'll make those a little bit more clear.
So some of it has already been covered in reimbursable expenses through ESSER, and that's why it's not reflected on that second page.
Yes, sir.
Got it. Okay, I think I got it. Thank you.
I'll try to make it a little bit more clear.
No, it's all right. I think I figured it out. Thank you.
On the estimated additional expenses, the lion's share of it is food service.
Correct.
Is there anything we can do as a community, as a board, anything that can be done to help mitigate any of that?
Communication out to the families. Please come to the cafeteria and get a meal. Please come when we start one of the areas that we've been working on with the elementary schools is called weekend meals. The more meals that families and students take, the more funds we get from the state. to help offset the cost of the program. So we have a lot of families that are like, we don't want the meals because we want them to go to somebody who needs them more. Well, it's not necessarily taking away from anyone. It's actually helping the program when families do take those meals. We have Scotland Elementary School. We did a pilot program with Scotland Elementary School to send students home with weekend meals. So they would get 2 meals at the end of the week to take home for the weekend. We kind of did it in a wrong way. We gave that as an opt-out as opposed to an opt-in. So there was a lot of families that were like, we don't want this food, don't send this home with us. And it created a little bit of a learning curve for the food service program itself. They are extending that program to Barlow Mountain and doing it as an opt-in instead. But the communication that we're trying to get out to families is you're not taking away from any student by taking these weekend meals home. You're helping the program because for each meal that they take home, we can supply that, we can submit that meal to the state of Connecticut and get federal dollars reimbursed for it. So for every meal that we give out, that's money and revenue that we're helping offset the program with, as opposed to, it's not necessarily the food that they don't want. They want it to go to a more needy person or a needy family. You're helping that needy family by taking that food. It's a little hard to understand, but that's how the federal program works. So we're trying to get the communication out. I know that Dr. Silva puts out in her communication a lot of the food service updates that are out there. We have out on the website under the parent section, communication as to the food service program that's going on. I guess it's just communication.
Dawn, at the high school, I think they're using an app now so they can pre-order their lunches, right? So you can take.
Yes, there's a new app. Yeah, you can instead of going and picking up the standard box deli meat or deli sandwich or whatever, or salad, you can order your specific type of meat and you can have lettuce and tomato and whatever else you want on your deli sandwich, or you can have a salad and you can have certain things on your salad, and you can pre-order a specific type of food that you're interested in, and it'll be ready for you to pick up, as opposed to before it was, they would just make the standard all the way across the board and there would be very little option. But now they're creating that option. So it's kind of like a Grubhub or a, whatever you want to call those organizations that are out there that deliver food.
So for those of the community watching at home, do you want to reiterate how they can go? Is it just through the schools? You mentioned a time slot earlier that people go pick stuff up. Maybe we could just reiterate that so it's in the notes too.
I don't have the specifics in front of me, so I don't want to speak to. I do know that it is posted in the high school cafeteria. It's also online. If anyone wants to go to, Dr. Silver put it out in her Friday memo this past Friday with the flyer that went out as well. So that's out there, and then we'll get that out on the website. So anyone who wants to see what that is, that's a great idea. Thank you, Liz.
On day to day though, if families want to pick up meals, they can pick them up at East Ridge on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, correct?
Between 3 and 4. Yep.
3 and 4, and they can access, they don't just have to access one meal. Is it 2 that they can pick up?
2 on Monday, 2 on Wednesday, and 3 on Friday.
And that's at no cost to the family and helps the school district. So that's
correct.
And then children who are in school, they may like their mom or dad or grandma, grandpa's lunch, but if they access the school lunch while they're there, we also get additional funding. So enjoy grandma's lunch when you get home and have ours when you're at school. That would be a significant help. And again, it feels as if it doesn't make sense, but at this point it's at no cost. And by the way, this isn't just Ridgefield, it's in my own community as well. My children haven't paid for lunch all school year and have been accessing it. So we encourage people to do that.
So that was Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at East Ridge Middle School from 3 to 4. 2 meals each on Monday, Wednesday, and 3 on Friday.
Correct.
Okay.
thank you.
And if there's a variation due to a holiday or something, then we usually communicate that out on the Friday communication, as well as put it out on the website under the parent section on the district website.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. What is up next? Pre-K.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm excited to have with us tonight Christina Salvestrini, who is our pre-K supervisor. She just jumped on. So we have included in the board packet tonight a memo that is informational in purpose, really an update, not necessarily a resolution, but an update in terms of a consideration for a shift in our preschool programming for next year. This is about the time that we do a lot of planning relative to our classes and population. So we wanted to update the board with where we are. So this is, again, it's not a presentation, it's just a memo. So I'm just going to give a little bit of context in terms of the design of our preschool program. And then Christina is going to outline what we're considering for next year. And then we'll take your questions. Just for reference, we did do a full presentation to the board in December of 2019. Let me pull up my, yes, in December of 2019, we did a full presentation to the board with a thorough overview of our preschool program. And that has been linked in the memo and is also, I believe, Cheryl attached it to the packet if anyone wanted to review for reference. Our preschool program is located only at Barlow Mountain Elementary School. It is a special education program that services students 3 to 5 years old with disabilities. And we invite in what we call peer models, students from within the community for a minimal tuition who do not require services, who participate and serve as social, behavioral, and communicative supports, really, models. We all know that kids turn to each other and look to each other first and foremost. And it's a very popular program in town. We get rolling referrals throughout the entire school year for students who require services as they age out of either the birth to 3 system or as we get referrals from either preschools, daycares, families, pediatricians. So our population, while our population changes at the K-12 level throughout the year, it really changes in preschool month to month. You see a significant change. We have 4 teachers who teach a total of 7 sections. So we have 3 teachers who each do an AM and PM. There are 4 Monday through Thursday are AM sections, and afternoon are Monday through Friday. We use Friday mornings for all of our meetings and evaluations. And then we have 1 teacher who is part of our RISE pre-K through 12 programming. And so she runs a RISE program and just has 1 cohort. So we have a pretty static design for a number of years. If you ask me when, I don't know off the top of my head, I could always find out, but I'm not exactly sure how long the time in the structure has been the case, but it's been for a while. Just last year, we actually added a 4th cohort without having to make a budget request. We had a reduction in another school and happened to have a teacher interested and available who had pre-K certification. And so we moved her to the pre-K program. But when we made that change, we thought that we needed the change in order to just adapt to a growing population. Thankfully, Christina came on board at the beginning of the 1920 school year. And what she really brought was a lot of wealth and knowledge about differentiated programming within preschool, which I'm not necessarily sure is exactly what we've had to the degree that we think we may need to in coming years. So the big thing that we want to talk about today is really the option for students to have maybe a different timing of their day instead of just the static half-day AM or static half-day PM. Consider if there are students who need something different, in particular our most impaired students and our 4-year-olds. So with that, I'll turn it over to Christina.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Hanaway, and good evening. So we have found that certain 4-year-olds in our preschool program require more than a 2.5-hour day to prepare for their transition to kindergarten. Additionally, as Dr. Hanaway mentioned, our students with more complex needs, specifically those who access our RISE services, require a longer school day in order to gain access to the extensive services needed, as well as have adequate time in a setting with non-disabled peers. So due to these 2 primary reasons, reasons, the preschool team is recommending and has designed changes for the preschool program for the 2021-22 school year. We are designing a model that will allow for certain students to attend a longer school day and as a result have access to a longer school week. So it's important to note that not all students require or will be recommended for this extended school day program. Rather, these decisions will be made on a case-by-case basis through the planning and placement team process. At this time, the only impact that this change in programming will be on transportation. And we're currently working through the exact timing of the extended day option as to not have a conflict with any existing bus runs. So we're working with the transportation department on that. Again, at this time, there would be no anticipated staffing increases. There's no additional need for space or materials. But I want to conclude by saying that it's also important to note that some additional factors included in this decision-making process include the fact that, like Dr. Hanaway mentioned, our class sizes grow substantially by mid-year due to new referrals and students turning 3 at any point in the school year. So oftentimes our classes by the end of the year will be triple the size that they were in the beginning of the school year. So this new change in model will allow for more flexibility as our class sizes grow. Also, I just want to note that we have seen a significant increase in initial evaluations. The number of initial evaluations from August 2020 to December 2020 has doubled since the previous year. And then finally, I just want to add that we did look at other area preschool districts and Durg A preschools, and Richfield currently offers the least amount of instructional hours. So this is why, all of these reasons are why we feel we need to have a shift in our model.
I just want to clarify a point that Christina just made. I'm sorry, Christina, I'm gonna not call you that in the public forum. So referral does not mean eligibility. So we have had a 100% increase in referrals. We have not had a 100% increase in eligibility or in population to the program. I do think that much of those referrals are COVID related, but it hasn't necessarily resulted in us having to shift program mid-year or anything like that. And then the second piece specific to the transportation, we've been working with Dawn and Rick Lupinacci, as Christina said, to work around or consider working around bus runs that already exist, not only to make sure we remain within the time of our contract, but that we wouldn't be contracting for additional vehicles that we already don't have, that we wouldn't already have available to us. So we know that staying within the period of the day and staying within the fleet number are two important variables to make this cost effective for us. Obviously, if something were to come up that would require us to make a different recommendation, we would bring it before the superintendent for feedback prior to doing that. But as of right now, that's how we're planning to go about the transportation piece. And as Christina also said, these decisions will be made at the PPT meeting on an individual case-by-case basis. So if this is a shift to go forward, all students moving into next school year typically do have meetings in the later spring where we'll be able to design their IEP so we're in compliance accordingly to start the school year. Very brief overview. Again, an update. We're not done yet necessarily with how long. And when we say an extended day, we just mean longer than the half day, not actually going outside the timing of the typical school day. But again, just an update. So we're happy to take questions if anybody has any. Nora? Oh, I'm not allowed to call on you. I'm so sorry. My teacher,
No.
my teacher just jumped in.
No, I just wanted to really applaud the revision. I think it's an awesome complement to the ESY, the extended school year program. It makes so much sense. That's what you do for the summer, and it follows that model. So I think it is it's a great addition to the program.
Thank you, Desi. Kathleen.
I concur. I mean, if that's what the children need to prepare them for our kindergarten, that's what they need. But please help me with, as you say, as numbers increase, there's only so many children, you can have in one of these classrooms to make it successful in any which way? And do we have the space then to create more classrooms moving forward? And that was not clear to me, because I understand the need, I applaud it, I think it's important, but what will happen if many more children are needed to be in the programs?
So a couple factors there. The Barlow preschool program is not the only way to get services through preschool. We have speech language pathologists, because the vast majority of students who need services at preschool level is within the realm of communication. We have speech language pathologists who provide only, a session, 2 sessions a week of speech and language. And so many students may not qualify or need the full program, but need what we call drop-in services, whether it be speech and language or some other individual service. So that's one piece, is that there's multiple avenues to receive services. And then the second piece is we do plan for growth. We do not start at full capacity in the size of our classes in the beginning of the year, knowing that we're going to grow. They grow quickly. And so what Christine and I and the team are going to look at is, was this fall a COVID bump, an anomaly? I think probably not. We'll probably have more this fall, and it will be multi-years until we know. But we're already mid-year, and I think that we're doing okay. We're not in a position, we added a 4th classroom only last year. So I don't think we're in a position necessarily soon to change that. I think we would commit to the board and to community, a shift for a year to reassess, to see, did it have the impact that we were hoping? We'd also have to collaborate with our elementary colleagues to say, okay, how were those kids who came up to kindergarten? Did you see a difference? Because that's really a very large piece of this, is feedback we get from the elementary teams who are saying, we think maybe they need a little bit more exposure, a little bit more practice in maintaining stamina, in expectations and routines than they're getting right now. So Kathleen, to answer your question, we build in room to grow, and there's other ways to get services. And we've predicted right now, we're within our space and our means.
Thank you.
Rachel.
Liz, I think you answered my question already, but I just want to be sure. Because you mentioned compliance for next year. In a preschool IEP, do you include like the number of times the student receives a particular intervention? So if you redo the schedule, you would have to accommodate the IEP to speak for that?
Christina, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so during our planning and placement team meetings, we will make individual decisions based on that child and whether or not they would benefit or need that extended day in order to provide those services. So I think your question was around, it would be based on it's an individual decision based on each child's needs.
Right. So yes, we do outline, you need X amount of minutes, hours and minutes a week of this service. You need X amount of hours a week of this service. That is specific as a section of their IEP, and we are held compliance to that. And so the teams at the end of the school year would have a sense of what the structure of next school year would be in terms of minutes and options that are available to kids based on their needs. And so they would align them, they would design them accordingly.
Thank you so much.
It's still, so it's the best of both worlds. It allows you to differentiate, allows you to individualize, you make case-by-case decisions. It's not just a cookie cutter, but then it also, gives more structure in leading into kindergarten.
Any other questions or comments about these changes? Thank you so much for presenting. Appreciate the update and look forward to hearing more.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. De Silva.
Okay, John is going to share the budget document that we began at our last meeting that has a few follow-up questions from Saturday. And so this has not been posted yet. It will be posted alongside this video tomorrow. Again, it's structured in a way so that it allows for each Board of Education's meeting and or questions to be documented. So even if we've answered them, we're going to make every effort to document them here as well, so the public can come to a quick Q&A. And so I actually started where we are right now. John has us starting at the questions that came from Saturday. And so I'm going to go through all of those questions briefly, just to be sure that they've been answered. So the first one was around analysis on the art schedule. And so it's clear from the public and the Board of Education that you'd like a further analysis and possible recommendation before the Board of Education budget gets approved. So as you'll see actually tonight, the timeline that Jonathan will share later this evening actually has the art presentation scheduled for March 8th. And I alluded to that on Saturday. We've now moved that up to February 8th so that it would give the Board of Education an opportunity to hear about a further analysis, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, as well as make any, we'll make some recommendations, and then the Board of Education can opine on that. But what you will see here, and John, if you don't mind just linking on the C attached document, what we have included for you. In the meantime, can you make that bigger, John? Is what you will see here is the elementary instructional minutes schedule. As John does that, it has two things. So we've broken down, and this is a typical year, so it's important that everyone remembers that. And there's a little bit of a story above that gives everybody a sense of what some of the definitions here are. But you'll notice what a typical schedule is. It includes the instructional pieces. And then if you scroll down a little bit, you'll also notice, scroll down a little bit further, lunch and recess. And we've been quite generous with transition time, which anyone knows is never 10 minutes. And then here's the second request that was asked of us, which is, can you give us an outline of the specials? And so that's what you'll see here. Again, what we're planning on doing is coming back to a presentation on February 8th. My goal was to try to do this with the new assistant superintendent, but she arrives on February 8th. So lucky for me, I have two assistant superintendents. So Dr. Hanaway is leading a small committee that really will begin this work. It won't end the work. I think we'll begin the work in a discussion around art, but really there's just a bigger, broader discussion that has to happen around all special areas and curriculum as well. John, you can escape back. And part of that conversation will be to include, part of that committee work will be to include the art teachers and engaging in that conversation. So when we come back to you on February 8th, we hope to have at least a starting point to share out enough so that the Board of Education can opine within this budget season. So I hope that that's helpful, that shift. The second question, or the second several questions that were asked of us is we were asked, why do we have an art teacher decrease at RHS, a science teacher increase at RHS, and tech ed seem to have a low enrollment, teachers up? So I'm going to let my colleagues speak to that and see if there's any further questions. So why don't we start with art?
So I can speak to the art. Thank you to Dr. De Silva. So our budget is always budget to budget. So one thing that was an anomaly this year is that our budget was not adopted until late June because of COVID. So originally the high school had budgeted or projected the budget for art to be 7.3. But we had then student enrollment. So all of our budgetary and staffing is based upon what students register for. And so we had actually been able to go through that entire process prior to the board adopting its final budget in June because of COVID. And there was a reduction in the VPA, Visual Performing Arts, at the time. So it was a 5.9 FTE instead of the original 7.3 FTE. So right now, the high school is projecting that there will be an increase in art for next year to 6.3. So it actually an additional 0.4. So that shows that the variations of what you see and the fluctuations of art between the budget, the actual, and the projected FTE. Are there questions that I can answer to that and more? So we're not projecting any reduction. It's actually an increase from actuals.
Okay, science. Dawn, is that you?
Sure, I can. When I approached it, I didn't approach it as the FTE. I approached it as the salary line because that's the areas that my department works with. And what we did is we looked at all of the science teachers that were projected to be budgeted for next year, where they fell on the salary grid, what their increases were going to be, and that's what you see in the budget book on the salary line is a contractual increase, and where many of them step to a high step or one of the top steps, which gave them quite a bit of a good increase, which definitely put them over. One other area that in the science line that at the time we were creating the budget for the salaries, we weren't sure what the breakout for the tech ed portion of the teacher's time was going to be. So we have 2.1s that we have in the science line that should have been on the tech ed salary line. And we can definitely allocate that for the next round of updates to our reports. But at the time that we created the report, we didn't know what portion of their time was going to be needed. So it is the salary line on the science is a little inflated, but it's the offset to the time that they would be spending on the tech ed that salary would normally have been put down there.
So
Okay.
Dr. De Silva, can I tag into the tech ed question then?
Yes.
That's related to that?
Yep.
Okay, so the high school does anticipate an increase in tech ed enrollment, and they project a 0.2, as Dawn just said, 2.1 increases to the tech ed department. So they project a 0.8 to a 1.0. So when Jonathan asked the question on Friday about enrollment, so several years ago, a former superintendent asked the high school to project their enrollment based upon an average of the past 3 years. So that is what they did. So they looked at their 3-year average in the tech ed department, and that would have projected enrollment of 56 students, which is what you saw in your budget pages. But in reality, they have new courses and increased enrollment. So in theory, the past 3 years is not predictive of what they anticipate to happen next year. So thank you, Jonathan, for bringing that to their attention and our attention. So we went back and said, well, if you anticipate needing 5 sections, what would you anticipate to be the average enrollment or the actual enrollment for that department, not based upon history? And that they said would be 88 students, which comes to an average of about 17.6 class size, not the 11. So that is truly what they believe they will have next year, hence why they've projected the 1.0 in that department.
Questions on science, art, or tech ed? Okay. The next question was on athletics, and the question that came up was, how did we pay for the tennis courts a few years back? And so I don't know if Dane is on the line, but we discussed it this morning, and Dane did a review. And essentially what Dane has in his budget is repair lines. And so the tennis courts, and it's a tricky spot, and I think, again, it's part of a bigger conversation when we discuss the sinking fund, because the tennis courts, for example, are not a part of a sinking fund, but yet they were getting repaired by Parks and Rec, and the Board of Ed contributed to their repair. Whether or not we want to consider other options in terms of how those things come up in the future, we should, but the reality is those things do bubble up where we might have immediate repairs and we can't necessarily wait for, you know, some type of donation or something of the like to fix it. And so our kids use it, we need it. And so that's where the money came from. There's Dane. So Dane, you want to hop in? Did I accurately summarize?
No, I think you summarized it well. And it's, again, it was a project that was not expected, not something that we had budgeted, but for the amount that Parks and Rec was looking for us to contribute towards that, it certainly provided us with, you know, it was a safety measure because the courts were in a state of needing repair badly. And so for us to be able to contribute towards that through our repairs line seemed like the appropriate step.
And Dane, as of right now, you still have those repair lines in your budget. So let's just say that we needed a small repair somewhere, that you would use those monies to repair the tennis courts or another item as well, right?
Yep. I mean, any number of repairs. It could be a you know, a machine in the weight room or an ice machine or any number of things that we use on a regular basis. This just happens to be one that is structural in nature. So,
questions on this one? All right, thanks, Dane. Thanks for holding on this long. Okay, busing. Can you provide a state statute that states we must provide transportation to busing? And I've attached 2 links along with the statute. So you can have an opportunity to read that. I think that that's essentially what you had asked for, Jonathan, was to direct you in to that space. And there it is. Okay, so you've had that's it. You've had some time, thanks, John, to go over the budget book and if there's additional questions. So what we'll do is we'll write them here and we'll answer them separately and not share them out publicly until we've done that with the board on February 8th, if that makes sense. Okay.
Does anyone have questions that have come up between a few hours ago and now? It seems we were just together. But anything that's come to mind since Saturday late evening? Dr. De Silva, I will ask the board members to forward me questions as they arise throughout this week. Try to get them to you again on Wednesday, Thursday, so that your team will have time to prepare before that next meeting. Does that make sense?
That works. A little turnaround time works.
Good. Does that work for my team?
Can I ask, do we have I know we've got the public hearing on Saturday. Is there a board meeting with discussion after that, or are we just doing the public hearing and then?
Saturday is just a public hearing.
Okay.
And Jonathan, you mentioned something about a form that people need to sign up by 9:30 a.m. Is that available to the public yet?
So the public hearing starts at 10. In order for a member of the public to be able to make their voice heard, we'll need their name, address, and email address on a form that is being posted on our website, I believe.
Yes.
Not sure if it's up now or if it will be up.
It's not up yet, so we're working on that. So the process for Saturday will be a little bit more, I think, like the town side through Zoom. So what will happen is rather than asking the questions like they do to you, Rachel, in a typical meeting, they'll actually be able to, hopefully, if John Mansfield works his magic, be able to do that in person in a square, just like it is now. And so what they'll have to do so that we're not in a Zoom bomb situation is they'll have to identify themselves with their name, their address, their Ridgefield address, their email address. We'll do that by 9:30. And then John Mansfield, who you can't see, but is sitting in a square here, will then send out to those individuals the actual Zoom link. And then those individuals will be in a waiting room. And when Mr. Steckler, or a combination of Mr. Steckler and John Mansfield, let them in, we'll be able then to speak. So it'd be Susie De Silva, lives on 10 Jacqueline, and here's my thoughts. And then they'll be let out and the next person will be let in. So if it works just like that, that would be perfect. So our fingers are crossed, but we'll try to get that document up, Rachel, to answer your question. Today is Monday, so probably by Wednesday or so, that'll be up.
And that is, again, that's a public hearing. There is no Board of Ed meeting after that or alongside it. So we'll be there just to hear comments from the public. Okay, shall we move on? Enrollment report.
Ms. Dean? Yes, I'd be happy to. So before you is the January monthly enrollment report. So because there wasn't a second board meeting in December, you'll see that the last one was at the second board meeting in November. We have an increase of 28 students. You will note that of our 9 schools, 7 of them had increase in enrollment, 2 had very slight decrease, and then we also had increase in the preschool enrollment. So between the 7 schools that had increases, the preschool, and the slight decrease in 2 schools, we do have that net plus of 28 students. Are there any questions about that?
Sean?
Are the students, the increase in students, are they new to the district, or are they returning from homeschool and such?
Sean, that's a great question. I actually don't know that. I get the net numbers. So I can certainly look into who the students are, but I don't know that. So I can look into that for you.
I can answer part of that though, Sean, is that I do receive any returns from homeschool. So I don't think that these are returns from homeschool. In fact, I would say, if anything, we still have a sprinkle or 2 of those happening every once and again.
Okay, so these are new to the district then.
They're more than likely new to the district, because if they were homeschool returns, the curriculum office is empty now, so it's me. So I haven't seen those.
Shall we move on to the staffing report?
Oh,
okay.
Sorry, Jonathan, I had a quick question.
Sure.
For outplaced, I see there's a decrease. Does that mean the child has come back into district, or for the outplaced students? It was 51 and we're at 49, so.
Yeah, I saw that. Can Dr. Hanaway answer that? Because I can't answer that either.
In some cases, we have move-ins and move-outs. Like students who moved to another district or were already in and out placement, or the other way around, students who were in and out placement and moved into Ridgefield.
Okay.
But then that also happens throughout the spring too.
That could also happen with an outplaced student hitting their 22nd birthday. Is that correct?
Yep.
Anyone else, or should we see staffing report?
Okay. So we try to capture every month any ins and outs of our staffing. So anybody that retires or resigns, or any new hires that we have. So again, this is from the end of November. So you can see that those changes never end. They're a constant for my department. But if there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to elaborate.
Questions? Okay. Moving along, we are sharing with you the Board of Ed's timeline for the rest of this year. The intention is to share this on a month-to-month basis. It does change very frequently. For example, on here you will see that for March 8th, we had the intention of a discussion item around special areas at the elementary school. We will not have that on February 8th. We will have the conversation around art on February 8th. Some of the ideas and questions that came up over Saturday primarily, some of those will be added to this agenda. Others will probably go to committee first. We looked at transportation tiers, start times, redistricting, and feeder patterns. Those would probably go to a strategic planning committee before they came to the board agenda. Pay to play and sinking fund might go to the Board of Finance first. Other ideas I might work with Dr. De Silva to add to to some of these later dates. For February, other than Art Now on February 8th, the two meetings in February are primarily going to be focused on the budget. We only had 2 full regular meetings. And that late February meeting is when we'll be voting to approve the budget. Further on, we will have our technology status update in March. We will have update and discussion around the guidance department at the high school in April. And Dr. De Silva, you want to talk about the forward thing committee that we're going to discuss that same evening?
Sure. And I'm sorry, Jonathan, but we may actually have EduLog on February 8th if we can get them here.
Great. I'll tell you what's budget related. That's fine.
So I'm sorry to do that, but that's there. In terms of the forward thinking committee, my budget presentation a couple of weeks ago indicated that this coming year was a foundational year and that our goal was to begin thinking about where we'd like to move our district forward. So similar to how we structured, not quite as big, but how we structured our reopening committee, we look to engage. It'll actually be led by hopefully my 2 assistant superintendents by that time, Dr. Hanaway and Ms. Gillette, and engaging community and school stakeholders in looking ahead and beginning to plan for the future, which is what my budget presentation launched us into. And the reason it's in April is because ultimately, as we all know, the budget process and thinking ahead starts early on. And so we just want to be as prepared as possible. We're not expecting a 1-year one and done, but rather a look short term and a look long term. And I expect that work to be collaborative and engaging not only with adults, but hopefully there'll be some kids in that as well. And then throughout the winter and spring, you'll see an update on our district priorities, some of which you'll get a sprinkle here and there, as you did today with Dawn and the bank accounts, but there'll be a more formal update as well.
We have that on February 22nd.
We do, and I think we have another one in the spring. I may be jumping ahead, Jonathan, sorry.
So as you see, if you compare what we have on the agenda for, say, March 22nd, it looks pretty lean, but then if you compare that to the agenda for this evening, items in a very timely manner will be added in, gifts or unexpected items will be added in, and then as well, output from the work of the committees is going to be put into these agendas as we move forward. The agenda, based on the bylaws here in Ridgefield, is built by the chair and the superintendent. That said, I want you all to take a look at this, and I will again share this every month, and let me know if there are items that you would like to see on there that you do not see, so we can work to find the appropriate spot to address everything. Does that make sense?
Jonathan,
comments or concerns?
May I
Yeah.
just add on one piece is that because it is obviously a very fluid document, as things just don't seem to be the right time. So for example, I think we actually had scheduled an update on NEOSC today, so it wasn't the right time. So in the future though, you'll see a red line or some way in which you can see how something may have been shifted, so that it's not that we just deleted it, but rather had to move it or it just wasn't the right
Got
time.
bumped and we'll know why. All right. Correspondence to the board. Do we have public comment this evening?
We do, Jonathan. Let's get to the screen. We have one public comment. Mark Simone, 36 Mimosa Circle. Under the ADA, an employer can have a workplace policy that includes a requirement that an individual shall not pose a direct threat to the health or safety of individuals in the workplace. Given that the COVID-19 virus poses such a threat, can we expect RPS to mandate the COVID-19 vaccine while providing legally mandated exemptions to those employees that work in or are subject to work in an RPS facility? That was public comment for this evening. I also have the correspondence report. So the board has received 18 emails since our last regular Board of Education meeting. One email was on a technical issue. 2 emails concerned a personnel matter. 1 email concerned the present learning model at the middle school and high school. 3 emails concerned the 2nd grade class size at Barlow Mountain Elementary School. 3 emails concerned class projections and budgetary implications. And 8 emails advocated for the art program in RPS, including but not limited to having a dedicated art teacher for each elementary school, integrity of the program, bringing back Art Rise, Art Leap, scheduling, and the emotional support needed for children.
Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome.
Do I have a motion to adjourn? Tina, second. Ken, all those in favor? 9, it's unanimous. Thank you all very much. Have a good night.
Be well, everyone.